On Mother's Day, the scent of cinnamon and baked apples filled my small home, a fragrance I had always associated with love and celebration. I had spent the morning preparing David's favorite pie, just as I had done every year since he was a boy. The sun, a brilliant Texas gold, streamed through the lace curtains, illuminating the tiny dust motes dancing in the air, each one a silent witness to the quiet life I led. My name is Margaret Hayes, a 67-year-old widow living alone on the outskirts of Dallas. This house, once filled with the boisterous laughter of a growing boy and the steady presence of my late husband Frank, now echoed mostly with memories and the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall, his last gift to me. I was trimming the wilting petals from a rose in a small vase when I heard the familiar purr of a high-end engine, a sound so out of place in my humble neighborhood. A moment later, my son David walked in. At 38, he was the picture of success, a man I had raised with hands worn from gardening and mending clothes, now a millionaire who navigated boardrooms with an ease that always filled me with a quiet, distant pride. He held a bouquet of lilies so vast and white they seemed to consume the light in my modest living room. He placed them on the table, the cellophane crinkling like brittle ice. He looked at me, his smile handsome but tired, the smile of a man perpetually chasing the next deadline. And then he spoke the words that would shatter the peaceful silence of my world. "Mom, my wife still sends you $5,000 every month, right? I just want to make sure you're comfortable." The air seemed to vanish from the room. The ticking of the clock in the hall suddenly felt deafening, each tick a hammer blow against my heart. $5,000? My mind reeled. For the past 8 months, my comfort had come from food packages from the church pantry, from the kindness of neighbors who left casseroles on my doorstep, from stretching every dollar until it screamed. My fingers, which had been gently tending to the rose, clenched into a fist around my worn apron. I felt a tremor begin in my hands, a cold wave of confusion and dread washing over me. I managed a whisper, my voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Son, the church has been helping me get by." David's smile faltered, replaced by a deep furrow in his brow. The warmth in his eyes flickered, extinguished by a sudden confusion. He opened his mouth to speak, but just then, a second figure appeared in the doorway, framed by the bright sunlight like an apparition. It was Clara, his wife. She was radiant, a vision in a silk dress the color of champagne that shimmered with every graceful movement. Her heels clicked with sharp authority on my worn wooden floors, and a cloud of expensive perfume, something floral and impossibly elegant, drifted through the room, overpowering the homey scent of my apple pie. It felt like an invasion. Her smile was dazzling, a perfect, polished thing, but her eyes, when they met mine, were as cold and clear as a winter sky. She did not know it then, but on that very day, in my small, sunlit home, the last light of her calculated elegance would begin to fade forever. If you are still with me on this journey, I ask you to listen closely, for every word I share is a piece of a truth I had to fight to reclaim. My story is not just about money, it is about the quiet betrayals that can happen in the places we feel safest. And if it touches something within you, please let it be known, so that this story might find its way to others who need to hear it. After my dear Frank passed away from a heart attack 10 years ago, my world shrank. I learned to live a slower, smaller life. I found solace in my garden, coaxing life from the stubborn Texas soil. I taught Bible classes at St. Mary's down the street, my voice weaving stories of faith for women who, like me, sought comfort in ritual. I didn't have much, but it was enough, or so I thought. But old age is a relentless creditor, and with each passing year, the cost of living rose like a quiet tide, threatening to pull me under. David, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose fears of the dark I had soothed, now lived in a world I could barely imagine. He owned a chain of tech companies, drove a brand new Tesla, and resided in a sprawling mansion in Park Cities. The annual property tax on his home was more than I had earned in my entire working life. I was proud, of course, what mother wouldn't be. I had raised him to be ambitious, to reach for the stars. But I had also raised him to be good, kind, and grateful. Lessons I was beginning to fear had been lost in his ascent. So, when he had walked in that afternoon, his face tired but familiar, my heart had warmed, until he spoke those fateful words. "Mom, my wife still sends you $5,000 every month, right?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Clara glided to his side, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. A smile, as sweet as honey laced with ice, graced her lips. "Oh, Mother," she said, her voice a soft melody. "You must have simply forgotten. I stop by every month to bring you the money, remember?" I looked at her, this beautiful, cold woman who wore my son's love like a designer accessory. I knew memory. I remembered every bill I struggled to pay, every prayer I whispered for help, every face at the church who offered me a loaf of bread. My memory was a fortress, built brick by brick over 67 years. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Clara had never given me a single penny. The room fell into a deep, unnerving silence. I could hear the hum of a lawnmower from a neighbor's yard, the distant bark of a dog, and the frantic, desperate pounding of my own heart. David looked between us, his gaze shifting from his gray-haired mother in her faded apron to his glamorous wife in her designer dress. His handsome face was a canvas of confusion. "Clara, you have been bringing the money, right? I transfer it to your account every month, on the 15th. Clara tilted her head, her smile never wavering, a mask of serene confidence. "Of course, David, darling. I come here every single month. Perhaps Mother just forgot. You know how it is, old age. The memory isn't what it used to be." The words were as soft as feathers, but they landed on my heart like stones. Old age, that dismissive, condescending phrase. I had heard it too many times since Frank died, from people who saw a widow and saw only a fading photograph, a memory losing its focus. But my memory was sharp. It was all I had left. I knew what I knew, yet I chose silence. I gave a slight, non-committal nod. Some battles are not won by shouting. They are won by observing, by waiting, by letting the liar become entangled in the web of their own deceit. David, ever the peacemaker, walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch felt distant. "Mom, it's probably just a misunderstanding. I'll check the bank accounts. I just want you to be comfortable, without any worries." I forced a faint smile, but inside me something had awakened. A quiet storm of suspicion and resolve was gathering strength. I said nothing more. I simply cleared the table, served the apple pie, and poured my son a glass of the orange juice he had loved as a boy. As David sat, Clara moved to his side, a possessive hand resting on his shoulder. Her gaze swept over me, cool and dismissive, the look of someone who believes money can buy not only luxury, but integrity as well. She glanced around the room, her eyes lingering for a moment on the old, faded photographs on the mantelpiece. David as a little boy, his hair a shock of gold, his eyes bright with a carefree smile. "You've done such a great job keeping this old house so clean, Mother," she remarked, her tone implying surprise that I was still capable. I smiled, a genuine, sharp smile this time. "Old, yes, but not so old that I forget who comes through my front door, Clara." David looked at me, a hint of unease in his eyes. "Mom, come on. It's Mother's Day. Don't be upset. I just want you to be happy, my son," I said, my eyes still locked on Clara's. "So do I. But happiness doesn't come from what people say they have done for you. It comes from what they have actually done." David froze. Clara's perfect smile tightened at the edges, a tiny crack in the flawless facade, before it vanished altogether. After they left, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air like a bitter ghost, I sat alone in my living room. The vast bouquet of lilies on the table seemed to mock me with its pristine, extravagant beauty. $5,000 a month. 8 months. That was $40,000. A sum so large it felt like a dream. That money could have fixed my leaking roof, which dripped with a mournful rhythm every time it rained. It could have replaced my broken refrigerator, whose motor rattled like a dying breath. It could have allowed me to live out my final years not in constant, quiet struggle, but in comfort and dignity. Instead, I had been counting cans of soup from the church pantry, rationing my meager savings, and thanking God for every small act of charity that came my way. I pressed a hand to my chest, not from anger, but from a deep, hollow ache that rose from my very bones. That night, sleep would not come. I sat at my small kitchen table, a single lamp casting a pool of yellow light onto the worn wood. I opened an old, leather-bound notebook, a birthday gift from David years ago. It was where I used to jot down grocery lists and prayers. But this time, I wrote something different. With a hand that trembled slightly, I wrote 2 simple phrases. find the truth. And beneath it, a reminder to myself, do not trust manufactured tears. I closed the notebook and took a deep, shuddering breath. I was not a weak woman. I had survived the loss of my soulmate, I had survived loneliness, and I had survived hardship. I would survive this too. David, my beloved son, may have been blinded by a beautiful face and a silver tongue, but I was not. And if Clara thought I would sit quietly in my little house while she played the role of the perfect, doting daughter-in-law, she had grievously underestimated the woman she was trying to fool. The battle had just begun, and I would be the one to choose the battlefield. The morning after their visit, the house felt unnaturally quiet. The lavish bouquet of lilies sat on the dining table, their cloying, funereal scent, a constant reminder of the beautiful lie that had invaded my home. I looked at them, so white and pure, and felt a cold resolve settle over me. Deceit often wears the prettiest disguise. I began my day not in the garden, but at my small wooden desk. My first step was not one of emotion, but of logic. For 30 years, I was the treasurer for the Women's Committee at St. Mary's. I balanced books, tracked donations, and accounted for every last dime. Numbers, unlike people, did not lie. I pulled out my old accounting ledger, its pages filled with my neat, precise handwriting. For the past 8 months, I had meticulously recorded every single expense, no matter how small. $12.50 for blood pressure medication, $24 for the electric bill, $10 for the community potluck dinner. Every coupon I clipped, every dollar I saved was noted. I flipped through the pages, my finger tracing the columns. There was no mention of any $5,000 deposit, no transfer from David Hayes, nothing. The ledger was a stark, black and white testament to my struggle and to Clara's fiction. My next step was harder. It required me to leave the safety of my home and face the world with this raw, new wound. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple but respectable dress, the one I wore to church on special occasions. I walked to the First Texas Community Bank downtown, the same bank where Frank and I had opened our first joint account over 40 years ago. The air inside was cool and smelled of clean paper and commerce. I sat across from a young teller named Molly, a kind-faced girl with bright, inquisitive eyes. I handed her my passbook, my hands trembling so slightly I prayed she wouldn't notice. "I need to check for any incoming wire transfers," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My son, David Hayes, said he has been sending me $5,000 each month for the past 8 months. Molly's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's a generous son," she said with a warm smile. She typed briskly on her keyboard, her nails making small clicking sounds. The smile slowly faded from her face. She frowned, typed again, and then shook her head gently. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hayes. There's nothing here, no transfers of that amount. The only activity on this account for the past year was a $1.35 interest payment back in February." I nodded slowly, the confirmation landing not with a shock, but with a heavy, sinking finality. The suspicion had been a shadow. This was the solid, undeniable truth. I thanked her, my voice a hollow echo in my own ears, and walked out of the bank into the blinding Texas Sunday. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, feeling as if a stone had been dropped into my chest, sinking straight through me. No transfers, no envelopes, no letters, nothing. For 8 months, while I had been carefully cutting coupons from the newspaper, choosing canned soup over fresh vegetables, and quietly praying for the church's food deliveries, a fortune intended for me had simply vanished. I was used to living modestly. I was not used to being made a fool of. I walked home, each step heavier than the last. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to mock me as I entered the house. "The truth is coming," it seemed to whisper. "The truth is coming." That afternoon I went to St. Mary's, not for a service, but for the familiar, comforting silence of the sanctuary. I sat in the last pew, the scent of old wood and beeswax filling my senses. Reverend Cole, a man with kind eyes who had known me for over 20 years, found me there. He sat beside me, his presence a quiet comfort. "Margaret, are you all right? You look tired today." I looked at my hands, clasped tightly in my lap. "I'm just trying to understand, Reverend," I said softly, "why my son's good intentions never seem to arrive." He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The Lord has a way of bringing all truths to light, Margaret. Do not lose faith." I nodded, but inside me I knew faith alone was not enough anymore. Faith needed action. That night, I opened the brown leather notebook again. On a fresh page, I wrote a new heading, The Clara Ledger. And beneath it, I began to document everything. Every visit, every phone call, every lie, no matter how small. Thursday, June 14th, I wrote. Clara stopped by, brought a lemon cake, said, "The money's been sent, Mother. Maybe the bank is just delayed." No envelope, no proof. Her smile was bright, but her eyes darted away when I met her gaze. Saturday, July 12th. Clara called, said she couldn't visit, had a last-minute charity meeting. I heard the distinct sound of clinking glasses and restaurant music in the background. Line by line, I recorded it all. There was no anger in my words, no hatred. Just the cold, methodical precision of someone who had spent a lifetime balancing numbers, knowing with absolute certainty that they never lie. The weeks that followed were a painful charade. Clara continued her visits, always the picture of perfection. Designer dresses, expensive handbags, heels that clicked on my porch like tiny, insistent hammers. She always brought a small, thoughtful gift. A bouquet of flowers, a box of expensive cookies, a scented candle. But never an envelope. Each gift felt less like an act of kindness and more like a bribe for my silence. One sweltering afternoon in August, I was in my garden, watering my lavender bushes, when her new car pulled into my driveway. It wasn't the familiar sedan. This was a brand new, gleaming white Lexus, so polished it reflected the clouds in the sky. It had temporary license plates. A recent, very expensive purchase. Clara stepped out, radiant as ever, holding a bunch of fresh lavender that she had undoubtedly bought from an upscale florist. "I brought you some flowers to help you relax," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Stress isn't good for the memory, you know." I set down my watering can, wiped my dirt-stained hands on my apron, and looked her straight in the eye. "My memory is just fine, Clara. It's fine enough to remember that the last time you brought me any money was never." For a split second, her face twitched, a flicker of panic in her cold eyes. But she recovered instantly, her bright, brittle smile snapping back into place. "Oh, Mother, you must be mistaken. I've been sending it. I told you. Your bank must be at fault. They're probably holding the funds." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach my eyes, and began to arrange the lavender she'd given me in a vase. Maybe so. But I already asked the bank. They said nothing has come through for 8 months. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sparrows on the fence seemed to stop their chirping. Clara fidgeted with the diamond necklace at her throat. I'll double-check with my bank manager," she said quickly, her voice a little too high. She practically ran back to her car, the scent of her perfume a frantic, fading trail. I stood on my porch and watched the Lexus disappear down the road, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. A mixture of bitter certainty and grim clarity filled my chest. She had lied. And now, she knew that I knew she had lied. That evening, I made a new entry in my notebook. August 22nd. Clara visited, lied about the bank, was visibly nervous when confronted, left in a hurry, drives a new Lexus. Each word was a nail, sealing the truth in place. I was no longer just a frail, praying mother. I was Margaret Hayes, a woman who had survived loss, debt, and empty promises. And I would survive this, to reclaim the truth that was mine. My next move required more thought. I couldn't confront David directly. Not yet. He was under her spell, and she would twist my words, paint me as a confused, senile old woman. I needed irrefutable proof, something even my son's blind trust could not deny. I thought back to my brief career as an accountant for a small firm before I had David. I remembered the protocols, the paper trails. There was always a paper trail. A few days later, a thought struck me, a cold and terrifying possibility. I walked down to the post office, to the old, dusty public phone booth that still worked. I didn't want to make this call from my home. I didn't know how far Clara's deception went, and a sudden, chilling paranoia had taken root in my mind. I dialed the main number for David's company, Hayes and Partners. My heart hammered against my ribs as I waited. "Hello," I said politely, my voice steady. "This is Margaret Hayes, David Hayes' mother. I'd like to speak with someone in the accounting department, please. It's a personal matter." After a brief hold, a woman with a crisp, professional voice answered, "This is Sandra Miller, head accountant. How can I help you, Mrs. Hayes?" I gripped the heavy black receiver tightly, keeping my voice calm and even, the voice of a slightly confused but polite elderly woman. "Thank you, Sandra. I just need to confirm something small. My son mentioned his company has been deducting $5,000 each month from his personal salary account to be sent to me. I just wanted to make sure that was all correct on your end." There was a short pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. Then Sandra spoke, her tone hesitant. "Mrs. Hayes, I can't disclose personal financial details over the phone, but let me check the internal directive. Yes, I do recall seeing the automated transfer order. It's set for the 15th of every month, for that exact amount. So it does appear the money was sent." I took a breath. "And it was sent to me? Margaret Hayes?" "Yes, the recipient's name on the transfer order is Margaret Hayes, but I'm not certain of the account details. The account number it's being sent to, it's not the one we have on file for your late husband's pension distributions. I assumed you had opened a new account." A chill, colder than any winter wind, ran down my spine. I forced myself to speak, each word a piece of ice. "Thank you, Sandra. That's all I needed to know for now." I hung up the phone and stood motionless in the phone booth, the world outside seeming to fade away. My heart was racing, but my mind was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. There it was. The missing piece of the puzzle. The ugly, undeniable truth. Someone had created a fake bank account under my name. And there was only one person close enough to my son, with access to my personal information, who could have pulled off such a brazen act of fraud: Clara. On the long walk home, my shadow stretched out before me, long and thin in the afternoon Sunday. The wind carried the scent of scorched grass and dry earth, a smell that reminded me of the poor Texas summers of my childhood. I thought of my father, a man of few words but deep integrity. He used to say, "Maggie, if you want to know if a person is honest, look at their hands. Honest hands," he'd say, "always show the marks of real work." I thought of Clara's hands. Long, slender fingers with perfectly manicured nails, adorned with diamond rings, always holding a designer handbag, not a single callus, not a single trace of honest labor. That night, I skipped dinner. I made a cup of strong peppermint tea and sat at my kitchen table, under the warm yellow glow of the single lamp. The house was so quiet I could hear the last of the cicadas outside, their buzzing fading into the night. I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote down everything. September 10th. Clara visited, elegant and pretending to care. New car, same lies. Called David's company. Spoke to Sandra Miller, head accountant. Confirmed $5,000 is transferred every month on the 15th. Confirmed the money is sent to an account in my name, Margaret Hayes, but with an unknown account number. The truth begins to surface tomorrow. I put down my pen and closed the notebook. The lamplight reflected my own image in the dark window pane. A silver-haired woman, small in stature, but with eyes that still burned with a quiet, unyielding fire. I knew that starting tomorrow, I would no longer be a mother waiting patiently for her son's attention. I would be a seeker of justice. I would be the woman who would unravel every last thread of Clara's beautiful, expensive, and utterly false world. I turned off the light and stepped out onto my small porch. The night breeze was cool against my skin, carrying the scent of jasmine and damp earth. In the corner of the garden, the moonlight fell on the old wooden bench where Frank and I used to sit for hours, talking about everything and nothing. I touched its worn, smooth armrest and whispered into the darkness, "Frank, if you were still here, you'd tell me to do what's right, wouldn't you?" The only reply was the rustle of the wind through the eaves of the house, but in my heart, I heard his answer. I went back inside, locked the door, and stood for a moment in front of the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was not tired or defeated. She was Margaret Hayes. And she knew that when the sun rose, Clara's carefully constructed game would begin to fall apart, piece by piece. She had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. An old mother, I thought with a grim smile, still has a few lessons left to teach. 3 days passed in a tense, waiting quiet. I tended to my garden, I attended my Bible study group, I went through the motions of my life, but underneath it all, a silent clock was ticking down. I was gathering my strength, steeling my resolve for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. I felt like a general preparing for battle, reviewing every piece of intelligence, anticipating every possible move from the enemy. On the morning of the fourth day, a firm, decisive knock echoed through my house. It was not the gentle tap of the mail carrier or the familiar rap of a neighbor. This was the sound of purpose. I wiped my hands on my apron, my heart giving a sudden, hard thud against my ribs, and went to the door. Standing on my porch was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair, and a face etched with the lines of serious responsibility. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked professional but slightly travel-worn. He offered a polite small smile that did not quite reach his weary eyes. "Mrs. Margaret Hayes?" he asked, his voice calm and low. "My name is Arthur Bennett. I am the chief financial officer at your son's company, Hayes and Partners." I narrowed my eyes slightly, my hand tightening on the doorknob. "Bennett? I only know a Sandra Miller in accounting." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Sandra is my lead accountant. She informed me about your call last week. She was concerned. And after reviewing the matter, I thought it was imperative that I speak with you in person. There are some things you need to know." There was a gravity in his voice, a hint of regret that told me this was a man of integrity. I stepped back and invited him in. I poured him a glass of iced water, the cubes clinking against the glass in the quiet room. Morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the lines on his face, the face of a man who had seen more than he wished to. He set a worn leather briefcase on my small dining table and opened it with practiced efficiency. Inside was a thick folder, its contents neatly clipped and organized. He slid the folder across the table toward me. As he did, I saw the familiar, comforting language of my past life: sharp printed text, neat rows of numbers, balance sheets, and transfer receipts. "These are copies of the last 8 wire transfers," he said slowly, his eyes meeting mine, each for $5,000. A total of $40,000. As you can see, the sender is David Hayes. The recipient is listed as Margaret Hayes, but the receiving account, the one your daughter-in-law provided, is titled as a trust account, an account under the name Clara Hayes. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been poured over my head, stealing my breath. My hands shook as I reached for the papers. I flipped through each page, my old accountant's eyes scanning the details. It was all there, in stark, undeniable print. Sender: David Hayes. Recipient account name: Clara Hayes. Verified by Northwood National Bank. Same date every month, the 15th, as steady as clockwork for 8 long, deceitful months. I looked up from the papers, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Mr. Bennett, who authorized this?" He sighed, a heavy sound of resignation. He removed his glasses and polished them with a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Hayes. She provided the account details. Every document for setting up the automated transfer bears her signature, alongside a signed authorization form from David." I froze, the word like a slap. "Authorization? You mean David gave her permission to take my money?" He nodded slowly. Most likely, he didn't read the fine print. She presented it as routine paperwork for establishing a recurring family gift. She also provided a copy of your identification, which I now strongly suspect was a high-quality forgery. The system automatically registered it as a transfer to you, based on the name, even though the money was being funneled directly into her personal account. I pressed a hand to my forehead, the room spinning slightly. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a calculated, humiliating theft. For 8 months, Clara had been using my name, a mother's name, to siphon money directly from my own son, all while smiling in my face and bringing me lemon cakes. "And David?" I asked quietly. "Does he know any of this?" Bennett hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Honestly, Mrs. Hayes, I do not believe so. David is a brilliant innovator, a hard-working man, but he trusts people too easily, especially those he loves. He lets Clara handle most of the household and personal financial paperwork. He just signs where she tells him to sign." Bennett paused, then looked up at me, his expression grim. "And there's more. She's also been using the company credit card for an alarming number of personal expenses." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process this new layer of deceit. "The company card?" Yes. The corporate American Express card for Hayes and Partners. It's supposed to be for client entertainment and business travel. But recently, we've found irregular charges, spa treatments at luxury resorts, shopping sprees at designer boutiques in New York, first-class flights to Cancun. Over $30,000 in just the last 3 months alone. I sat in stunned silence. The words echoed in my head: spa, jewelry, flights. I turned to look out the window at the old wooden bench where Clara and I had once sat, drinking iced tea while she chattered on about her charity work. I remembered her voice so clearly. "Mother, David is just so busy. I handle everything for him now. It makes his life so much easier." Now I knew what everything meant. It meant every last dollar she could get her hands on. I turned back to Bennett, my voice no longer a whisper, but raspy and firm with a newfound resolve. "Mr. Bennett, if I choose to expose this, will you help me? Will you stand with me?" He met my gaze, his gray-blue eyes steady and unwavering. "Mrs. Hayes, I believe in fiscal responsibility, but more than that, I believe in simple justice. However, we need to be careful. Your daughter-in-law is clever. If we are not strategic, she will twist the narrative, paint you as vindictive, and turn your son against you permanently. She is not an easy opponent." I nodded slowly. "I know. I've seen her do it. She smiles while she lies." A faint, grim smile touched Bennett's lips. "I will help you. Give me a few days. I need to gather everything. I will pull all the transaction histories, all the related documents, and I will secure a written confirmation from her bank that the account in question is not yours and that you have no access to it. It will take some time, but I promise you, we will have the undeniable truth." I looked at him, this stranger who had walked into my life, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in anyone for a very long time: unshakable integrity. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," I said softly, the words filled with a gratitude so deep it brought tears to my eyes. "You have no idea how much this means to me." He closed his briefcase and stood to leave. "I'm just doing my job, Mrs. Hayes, and I'm sorry to say this, but cases like yours, they happen more often than you would think. Many good people are betrayed by those they trust the most." I nodded, my eyes landing on a framed photo on the wall. It was David, at 10 years old, grinning from ear to ear, standing beside his father at a fishing tournament. I remembered that day so clearly. It had rained lightly that morning, and Frank had said to me, "Teach him to tell the difference between a good man and a smooth talker, Maggie. They often wear the same smile." Bennett left, the quiet click of the front door closing behind him echoing in the silent house. I was left alone with the thick stack of papers on my table, each page a testament to Clara's greed. I carefully gathered every single document, placed them in a small metal lockbox I kept in my closet, and turned the key. It felt like I was locking away the last remnants of my trust. As the afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across my porch, I brewed a cup of strong black tea. I sat at my kitchen table and looked out at my garden, where the lavender swayed gently in the breeze. Everything outside looked so peaceful, so ordinary. But inside me, a quiet fire was burning. I took out my notebook, opened to a fresh page, and wrote slowly, my hand now firm and steady. September 11th, Mr. Bennett visited. He brought records of 8 transfers, $5,000 each, all deposited into an account under the name Clara Hayes. He confirmed Clara is also using the company credit card for extravagant personal spending. David was deceived. It was not just my money, but his, too. I have an ally, the fight truly begins. I set the pen down and looked out the window. The sky was burning red, a streak of fire slashing across the evening clouds. In a low, steady voice, I spoke to the empty room. "Clara, you forgot one small detail. You forgot I worked as an accountant for 40 years. I know how to read both lies and numbers, and this time, the numbers will speak for me." I closed the notebook, feeling a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, I did not feel alone. There was someone else, a witness, who was willing to stand with me. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in a long time. The sound of the crickets in the yard seemed like a steady, hopeful rhythm. In my dreams, I saw Arthur Bennett standing in a brightly lit room, holding up the folder of evidence, while Clara backed away, her beautiful face contorted in shock as each of her secrets was peeled back, layer by layer. And when I woke in the morning, to the gentle light of a new day, I knew I was no longer a victim. I was the one setting the truth in motion. With every fact now in my possession, lined up as neatly as the rows on a balance sheet, I knew it was time to act. It was time to set the trap. I picked up the phone and dialed David's number. My son's voice, when he answered, was warm and familiar, but I could hear the exhaustion that always tinged the edges of his words. "Mom, hi. I'm so sorry I've been swamped lately. Clara says she's been visiting you regularly, keeping you company. Is everything okay?" I smiled, a small, secret smile. I kept my tone light and cheerful, the loving mother who suspected nothing. "She has been, son. Clara is so very thoughtful. In fact, I was thinking of inviting you both to dinner this Sunday. It's been too long since we've had a proper meal together, just the three of us." David agreed instantly, his voice filled with a relief that pained me. He had no idea of the thin, sharp wire of purpose hidden within that simple invitation. I spent all of Sunday morning preparing for them. It was a ritual, but not one born of love this time. It was a ritual of strategy. I made honey-roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and an apple walnut salad. And for dessert, his childhood favorite, a warm apple pie with a sprinkle of cinnamon. I polished my late husband's old silverware until it gleamed. I set the dining table with soft candlelight and my best linen napkins. Everything was arranged to look perfectly warm, perfectly sincere, perfectly ordinary. It was just enough to make a liar let down her guard. At precisely 6 o'clock, I heard the whisper-quiet engine of the silver Lexus at the gate. My heart began to beat a little faster. Clara stepped out first, flawless as always. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and she wore a jade-colored silk dress with a string of pearls at her throat. A faint trail of Dior perfume followed her up the steps. David followed, carrying another extravagant bouquet, this time of white lilies. "Mom, you look great," he said, grinning as he hugged me. "This house always smells like home." I smiled, resting a hand on his arm. "I'm better than ever, son. Thanks to God's grace. And to the two of you for taking such good care of me." Clara smiled her usual smug, polished smile. I recognized that look now. It was the look of someone who was utterly convinced that she held all the strings. I poured the wine. I chatted about the weather, about my lavender bushes, about the new neighbors down the street. The conversation flowed easily, as if no shadow of doubt had ever darkened my door. I let the room warm up. I let her relax into the familiar role of the perfect daughter-in-law. Then, when the main course was served, I looked up and smiled my most gentle, grateful smile. "I just want to thank you both again, especially for this month's $5,000. It came right on time." Clara paused for just a fraction of a second, a tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation before she flashed her bright smile and took a delicate sip of her wine. "Oh, Mother, please don't be so formal. I'm just doing what I should." I nodded, pretending to be a little shy. "Well, I'm so thrilled. I just bought a brand new heater for the winter. You know how those Texas nights can get chilly, and thanks to that money, I feel so much more at ease." Clara's smile widened, smug, and deeply satisfied. She tilted her head toward David, a silent gesture that said, "See, everything is perfectly fine." I watched her, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. Then, as if the thought had just occurred to me, I asked in an offhand, casual way, "Oh, Clara, I'm just curious. What day of the month do you usually send the transfer?" She wasn't prepared for it. It was too specific, too mundane. She answered instantly, a reflex born of practiced lies. "The 10th. Mother. Every month. On the 10th. I nodded lightly, a silent victory singing in my veins. But before I could say another word, David spoke, a slight frown on his face. "Wait. Not the 10th. Honey." I set up the automatic transfer for the 15th. The room went silent. A deafening, ringing silence, where the only sound was the faint clink of a fork against a plate. It was the moment a liar steps squarely into her own trap. If it were you, sitting at that table, facing the person who had so thoroughly deceived you, would you have stayed quiet, as I did, or would you have called them out, right then and there? Tell me in the comments below. I suspect many of us have lived through a shattered dinner like that one, at least once in our lives. They stared at each other across the table. Clara forced a laugh, blinking a few times as if trying to clear her thoughts. "Really, darling?" she said, her voice strained. "I could have sworn you said the 10th. David's frown deepened. "No, I'm positive it's the 15th. I picked that specific day because it's right after our main payroll cycle clears. I remember it distinctly." The room sank into a cold, heavy stillness. I smiled gently and set my fork down, as if the conversation was of no great importance. "Oh, that's wonderful. I'll make sure to go to the bank on the 15th then, just to check." "You know how these banking systems can have glitches sometimes." Clara gave a brittle laugh, desperately trying to regain her composure and hide her growing unease. "Oh, Mother, you're always so careful." "Don't you worry. I've been sending it regularly. I'm sure it's all there." David nodded, but his eyes had shifted. A small, new seed of doubt had been planted. He turned to his wife, about to say something more, but she quickly changed the subject, talking brightly about a new project at work, about the weather, about anything at all to fill the sudden, dangerous silence. I sat quietly, watching them both, and inside me, there was a clean, perfect calm. The calm of someone who knows she has set the exact right trap, and the prey has just willingly walked into it. After dinner, I brought out the dessert. The crisp apple pie, with its scent of cinnamon and nostalgia, filled the room. David praised it, saying it was just as good as he remembered from his childhood. Clara barely touched hers. She kept glancing at her watch, a restless energy about her, as if she was suddenly desperate to leave the cozy little house she thought she had so thoroughly under her control. At the door, as they were leaving, I gave them both a warm hug. "Thank you both so much for coming. I haven't laughed this much in a long time." Then, just as Clara turned to walk down the steps, I added one last, gentle reminder. "Remember, I'll check the account on the 15th, just to be sure that bank system isn't acting up." Clara forced a smile, her eyes avoiding mine. "Yes, Mother. I'm sure there won't be any problem at all." David kissed my cheek, his eyes still gentle, but I saw something else there now, behind the familiar affection. It was a thin, new line of doubt, a shadow that hadn't been there before. When the silver Lexus finally pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the darkness, I stood in the doorway for a long moment. The night wind rustled the leaves in the old oak tree in my yard, a sound like a quiet, collective sigh. What I felt wasn't triumph, it was release. I went straight to the small, cluttered office off my kitchen and turned on my old, slow desktop computer. The glow from the screen illuminated a photograph of my husband Frank, his kind smile seeming to offer a quiet encouragement from across the years. I opened my email account and began to type. There were only two people in the world I trusted now. Arthur Bennett, the honest chief financial officer, and Amelia Rowe, my old college roommate who had become one of the top financial fraud attorneys in Dallas. I typed slowly, my heartbeat steady, my eyes clear. The subject line was simple. "It is time to begin. Bennett Amelia," I wrote. "Everything is ready. I have just confirmed that Clara lied about the transfer date, directly contradicting David to his face. They think I believe their stories, but the foundation of their deception has begun to crack. I want us to move forward with the plan. Please begin the formal process of subpoenaing all relevant bank records and prepare the comparison file. By the 15th of this month, I want every single piece of evidence lined up. It is time for her to self-destruct. Sincerely, Margaret." I reread the last line and smiled faintly. There was something about that phrase, self-destruct, that made me feel lighter. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about allowing justice to unfold, propelled by the liar's own mistakes. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, the old springs groaning in protest. Outside, the night breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of jasmine and damp soil. I closed my eyes and listened to the grandfather clock in the hall, its steady ticking now counting down to the 15th, the day the truth would finally break through the surface. 2 days later, a reply from Bennett appeared in my inbox. His email was short and to the point, just like the man himself. I have obtained preliminary confirmation from Northwood National Bank. The account under your name was indeed opened by Clara Hayes, using what they now believe to be forged identity documents. They will release the official data as soon as we serve them with the subpoena. Amelia will handle that part. Everything is moving in the right direction. B. I read the email 3 times, feeling a tightness in my chest finally begin to loosen, like an old iron gate slowly swinging open. I am not a cruel woman. I just want the truth to be spoken aloud, so that my son can finally wake up. I want David to understand that trust is not a blank check for someone to drain until there is nothing left. That night, I made one more entry in my notebook, a small concluding ritual. September 13th. Dinner was a success. Clara exposed her own lie. David has begun to doubt. The 15th is the day. Justice is coming, as soft as a whisper, but as powerful as a storm. I closed the notebook and blew out the candle I had lit on my desk. In the dark, the moonlight filtered through the window, casting a silver glow across my face. I looked in the mirror and saw a silver-haired woman, her frame slight, but her eyes bright, with a fire they had not held for years. "Frank, do you see?" I whispered to the empty room, or perhaps to my husband. Long gone. She thinks she's so clever. But her own mouth tightened the noose. All I have to do now is stay quiet and wait for the 15th. I smiled a small, warm smile that filled the room with a silent strength. The trap was set, and the prey was already walking right into it. The morning of the 17th, 2 days after the fateful date, the Texas sky was a startling cloudless blue. I sat by the window with a cup of hot jasmine tea, feeling strangely, completely calm. Today was the day Bennett had promised to send the complete file. In just a few hours, every lie, every deception would have a shape, written in black ink on white paper. Around 9 o'clock, the mail carrier knocked on my door. He handed me a large, sealed manila envelope, stamped with the words "Confidential, Hayes Financial Record." I set it on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment before my trembling fingers finally tore it open. Inside were dozens of clean, crisp printouts. 8 wire transfers, each for $5,000, $40,000 in total. Sender, David Hayes. Recipient, Clara Hayes. Bold, undeniable lines on official bank stationery. I read them twice, then a third time, and still felt a wave of disbelief, as if the cold, hard numbers were mocking my foolish faith. But there was more. Tucked at the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note from Bennett, in his neat, precise script. "Mrs. Hayes," he had written, "Clara Hayes used this account as a personal slush fund. In addition to the 8 transfers from your son, there are dozens of other charges made via a secondary debit card linked to the account. Spa treatments, high-end shopping, luxury travel, and a significant down payment on a new car lease. Total spending from this fraudulent account over the past 8 months, $47,800. I sat very still. The morning light slipped through the blinds, laying pale gold stripes across the pages, the color of a truth that had been hidden for too long. I turned to the next sheet. It was a receipt from a spa in Houston for $1,200, then a charge for 2 first-class tickets to Cancun for $3,600, and then the largest single item, a down payment for a new Lexus, for $15,000. Each receipt was like a small, sharp knife twisting in my heart. I remembered her walking into my house so polished and perfumed, holding a small gift, smiling her soft, insincere smile and saying, "Mother, I just want you to know that I care for you as if you were my own." Now I finally understood. Her idea of care was to drain every dollar she could, all under my name. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. Then I reached for my brown leather notebook, the one I now thought of as my justice journal. Under the date, I wrote carefully, one clear word at a time, September 17th. Received Bennett's records. 8 transfers of $5,000, all into Clara's hands. Spa, travel, new car. $47,800, the price of trust. My hand trembled as I wrote, not from fear, but from the raw, powerful emotion of a woman about to reclaim the dignity that had been stolen from her. That afternoon, my attorney, Amelia Rowe, called. Her voice was firm and precise, the voice of a woman seasoned by tough courtrooms and tougher opponents. "Margaret, I've reviewed everything Bennett sent over. It's all here. It's solid. This is a textbook case of elder financial exploitation. We can go the criminal route or the civil route. It's your call." I paused, looking out the window at the roses blooming in my garden. "Not yet," I answered quietly. "I don't want the court to see it before David does. He needs to witness it with his own eyes. Only then will justice truly mean something." Amelia was silent for a moment on the other end of the line. Then she said, her voice softer now, "You're right. There is nothing more powerful or more painful than a son realizing his wife has exploited his own mother's trust. That's why," I said, my plan forming as I spoke, "I'd like Reverend Cole to help me. I want to arrange a small private charity evening at my house. A pretext. A stage. So they will both come, without suspicion." Amelia gave a soft, knowing laugh. "A staged evening to expose the truth. That's brilliant, Margaret. I'll have Bennett condense the file into a brief, powerful summary that David won't be able to ignore." Near dusk, I drove to St. Mary's. The red evening light washed over the old stone steps of the church. I found Reverend Cole in the main hall, arranging wooden chairs for the evening service. After I explained my plan, he stood in thoughtful silence for a long moment. Then he smiled kindly. "Sometimes, Margaret, the Lord doesn't need thunder and lightning to reveal a sin. Sometimes, all he needs is the small, quiet light of the truth." I squeezed his hand, my heart filled with gratitude. "I just want David to finally see that light, Reverend. Not for revenge, but so he stops being blind." On the way home that evening, I opened Bennett's file again. I spread all the papers across my dining room table. Every statement, every receipt, every single piece of damning evidence. With a red pen, I circled the largest withdrawals, the most extravagant purchases. Then I slipped them all into a thick, beige envelope. On the front, in bold, steady letters, I wrote, "Donation Documents, Senior Assistance Fund." Only I knew that there wasn't a single donation inside that envelope. Only guilt and greed and deceit. I sat there for a long time staring at the papers. My hands trembled, not from fear of what Clara might do, but because, for the first time in months, I could feel my own heart beating strong and steady again. For so long I had allowed myself to believe I was just a widowed old woman, living a simple life, someone who needed to be taken care of. But looking at that pile of proof, I realized I was never weak. I had just been convinced to believe that I was. I stood up, poured myself a glass of cool water, and looked out at my backyard. The night sky was full of stars, so vast and quiet I could hear the crickets chirping between the gusts of wind. I remembered something else my husband Frank used to say. If someone hurts you, don't pray for them to apologize. Just hold up a mirror and let them see their own reflection. I whispered to the empty room, "I'm about to do exactly that, Frank." The stage was now set for the final act. I had arranged for the small, intimate charity dinner to be held at my home on a Sunday evening. The guests were to be David, Clara, Reverend Cole, and a surprise guest that only I knew about. I spent the day cooking David's favorite meal since childhood, a rich, slow-simmered beef stew. The familiar aroma of herbs and red wine filled the house, a scent of home, a scent of love. But this time, I wasn't just cooking out of love. I was cooking as part of a ritual, a final dinner that would force my son to finally see the truth I had kept hidden for too long. On the dining table, I laid out a crisp white tablecloth, my antique porcelain dishes, and 3 small wine glasses. In the very center of the table, the beige envelope rested, neat and unassuming, an invisible guest waiting to be acknowledged. Around 7 o'clock, I heard the whisper of the Lexus in the driveway. Through the window, I saw David and Clara arriving. He wore a simple white shirt, looking tired but handsome. She, as always, was overdressed for the occasion, wearing a pale pink silk dress, new heels, and a string of pearls that gleamed at her neck. David hugged me tightly. "Mom, I miss this smell. It smells like home." I smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I made it for you, David. Just like old times." Clara stood behind him, that polished, artificial smile glued to her lips. "Oh, how cozy. You always make dinner feel so special, Mother." "Yes," I said softly, my eyes meeting hers for a brief, intense moment. "Tonight will be very special." 15 minutes later, Reverend Cole arrived, holding a large, white envelope. "Sorry I'm late, Margaret," he said warmly. "Here are those donation papers you asked me to bring for our meeting." I took the envelope with a nod of thanks and gestured for him to join us at the table. Clara tilted her head, her voice laced with a syrupy sweetness. "Oh, so this really is a charity dinner." "Mother, I thought you were just joking." I poured everyone a glass of wine, smiling gently. "Yes, a dinner to talk about trust, and giving, and honesty." The words made Clara stiffen slightly, but she quickly smoothed her expression, taking a delicate sip of her wine. David just kept smiling, completely unaware of the tension that was beginning to coil beneath the surface of the polite dinner conversation. Once everyone was seated and had been served their stew, I reached for the envelope Reverend Cole had brought. The papers inside were neatly arranged, a testament to Bennett's precision. I pulled out the stack and spread the first sheet on the table in front of my son. "Son," I said slowly, my voice calm and even. "This is the list of all the donations our Senior Assistance Fund has received over the past 8 months. I think you should take a look." David frowned, confused. "Donations?" "Mom, I've been sending you the transfers every month. There's no need for donations." I slid the bank statement toward him. The bold print was unmistakable. Recipient: Clara Hayes. Amount: $5,000. Date: the 15th of each month. David went completely silent. His eyes dropped to the page, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to a dawning, horrified shock. Clara jumped in, her voice sweet but pitched a little too high. "Oh, that must be some kind of mix-up, darling. Mother, you've been getting the money, right? Banks make mistakes with recipient names all the time." I kept my voice perfectly calm. "Is that so? Then how about this one?" I slid another paper across the table. "A spa bill from Houston for $1,200. Charged to the secondary card on the account under your name, Clara." "Was that the bank's mistake too?" Her face stiffened, but she forced a laugh. "Oh dear, that's so strange. Maybe someone used my name by accident." Before she could finish her frantic, desperate lie, a deep, male voice came from the doorway. "No, Mrs. Hayes. No one used your name by accident. I am the one who prepared those records." Everyone at the table turned. Arthur Bennett stood at the threshold of my dining room, holding another set of printed pages. I had asked him to come at precisely 7:30, but I hadn't told anyone else. Clara's face went completely pale. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. David looked at him, utterly confused. "Who are you?" "I'm Bennett," he said firmly, stepping into the room. "Arthur Bennett, the chief financial officer at your firm. And I am the one your mother authorized to investigate the transfers being made, fraudulently, under her name." The air in the room froze. I rose from my chair, facing Clara directly. "Bennett can verify every amount, every signature, every single transaction. 8 transfers, $5,000 each. Not one of them ever reached me." David finally turned to his wife, his voice breaking. "Clara, what is this? What is going on?" She grabbed his hand, her eyes instantly filling with tears, the manufactured tears I had warned myself about. I just borrowed it, David, that's all. I was going to pay it all back. I didn't want to worry your mother with my financial troubles." I sighed softly, the sound full of a weary sadness. 8 months of borrowing, and you did it by forging bank documents under your mother-in-law's name? Clara sobbed harder, but her tears carried no guilt, only a desperate, cornered desperation. David pulled his hand away from her as if he had been burned, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen in him before. "What did you do to my mother?" he shouted, his voice shaking with rage. "I sent that money so she could live in comfort. And you used it for cars, and spas, and vacations? You lied to my face every single day." Clara scrambled back from the table, her face drained of all color. "You don't understand. Enough." David slammed his palm down on the dining table. The wine glasses rattled sharply. The room fell silent. The only sounds were Clara's ragged, panicked breathing and the heavy pounding beat of my own heart. Reverend Cole, who had sat in quiet observation the entire time, folded his hands on the table and spoke in a low, steady tone. "Sometimes, God doesn't need to punish the guilty. He simply allows them to see their own true reflection." I sat back down and looked at Clara, my voice quiet but clear. "You know, I never really needed the money, Clara. What I needed was respect. And you took that, not just from me, but from your husband too," Clara sobbed, stammering incoherently. "Mother, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to help David manage things. I didn't mean—" I shook my head. "Stop lying. You didn't manage anything. You stole." Bennett stepped forward then, placing the final, complete file directly in front of David. "These are the originals, Mr. Hayes, forged authorizations, bank records, credit card receipts. I suggest you keep them. You are going to need them to protect what is left of your assets." David said nothing. He just stared at the numbers on the page, then he lifted his eyes to me. And in them, I saw a world of pain and shame, and the first, flickering spark of a terrible awakening. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I was such a fool to trust her." I reached across the table and laid a hand on his arm. "No, son. The mistake is never in trusting. It's in those who betray that trust." Clara suddenly burst into a wild, hysterical sob, glancing wildly around the room for an escape. "I can't take this anymore," she screamed, jumping to her feet. "I don't need any of you." "If you want to believe her, then go ahead." She snatched her expensive purse from the floor and stormed out of the dining room. Her heels struck the wooden floor with sharp, angry clicks, each step sounding like the final, violent end of something. David didn't move. He didn't try to stop her. He just sat there, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The front door slammed shut. And then there was only silence. No more crying, no more excuses. Only the fading smell of beef stew and the heavy, immovable presence of the truth. I looked at the open envelope on the table, the papers scattered like fallen leaves, the proof of 8 long months of deceit. I exhaled slowly. "It's done," I said quietly. "The curtain has fallen." Bennett nodded, beginning to gather the files into a neat stack. Reverend Cole rose and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You have done what not every mother has the courage to do, Margaret." I smiled faintly, but inside, there was only an empty ache. This victory didn't bring me joy. It only brought me release. After the trial, an eerie stillness settled over my house. The silence was different now, heavier. There were no more unexpected knocks on the door, no more tense phone calls from lawyers. There was only the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the way the afternoon sun slipped through the curtains, illuminating the tiny specks of dust that floated, undisturbed, in the air. Months passed. A season turned. David didn't call. There were no messages, no emails, not even a simple text to ask, "How are you, Mom?" I didn't blame him. I understood, in the deep, unspoken way a mother understands her child, that he was navigating the wreckage of his own life, a life built on a foundation of lies he hadn't seen. Still, on quiet nights, when the moonlight traced patterns across my bedroom floor, I often found myself holding my phone, staring at the name David Hayes in my contacts. I would never press call. I would just look, a silent vigil of a mother's heart, and then set it down. Being a mother, I was learning, sometimes means knowing when silence is the only space in which your child can truly heal and grow. The restitution payment arrived one morning in June. An email from the bank, its subject line sterile and official. Deposit completed. $40,000. A sum I hadn't seen in one place in my entire life. I thought I would feel a surge of triumph, of vindication, but instead I just felt hollow. I sat in front of the computer for a long while, just staring at the number on the screen. And then, a thought, clear and certain, rose from the emptiness. If this money had once been a tool of deceit, then now it had to become an instrument of good. I used a small portion to finally repair my leaking roof, to replace the rattling old refrigerator, and to buy a proper heater for the winter. With the rest, I reached out to Reverend Cole and my lawyer, Amelia. We sat in the quiet parish office, the air smelling of old books and coffee. "I want to start a small foundation," I told them, my voice steady. "I want to call it the Grace Hands Foundation. I want to use this money to help elderly people who have been financially exploited by their own children, their own families, just like I was." Reverend Cole looked at me for a long moment, his kind eyes studying my face from behind his thick glasses. Then he smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. Margaret, this isn't just an act of kindness. This is how God turns our deepest pain into the seed of something new. Amelia, ever the practical one, flipped open her notebook and began writing. We'll register it as a nonprofit. I'll handle all the legal paperwork, pro bono. Reverend Cole can represent the community outreach. And you, Margaret, you will be the founder. I chuckled softly, my hand gripping my warm coffee cup. I don't want to be the founder, Amelia. I'm just a mother who learned how to stand up again. 3 months later, the Grace Hands Foundation officially opened its doors. Our first office was a small, borrowed room in the basement of St. Mary's Church. We had 3 mismatched desks, an old, noisy printer, and a simple wooden sign I had carved myself, with the words, "Helping the Forgotten Find Their Voice Again." Each week, Reverend Cole and I met with people who came to us with their stories, their voices often trembling with shame and fear. An old woman whose daughter had tricked her into signing away the deed to her home. A 70-year-old man whose grandson had systematically drained his pension account. An 80-year-old widow whose signature had been forged on a business loan. Each story was a fresh wound, but I had learned how to listen without breaking. I would simply hold their hands, look into their eyes, and tell them what I had lived. That the truth doesn't always save you instantly, but it always, always arrives right on time. Amelia worked tirelessly, reaching out to legal aid organizations, applying for grants, and training a small group of volunteers. I oversaw what we came to call the heart work, listening, writing letters of support, comforting people, and documenting their long journeys toward justice. One afternoon, while we were tidying up the office, Reverend Cole said quietly, "Isn't it strange, Margaret? The very thing that was meant to destroy you has become a light for so many others." I smiled. Maybe that's how God rewrites the ending for those who were once betrayed. As the foundation grew, word began to spread. Reporters started to call, wanting to interview the brave mother who sued her millionaire daughter-in-law. Local news stations invited me to appear on their talk shows. One newspaper even offered me a book deal. I declined them all. Politely but firmly. I didn't want my pain to become a story for people to gossip about. I just wanted peace. Sometimes, silence is the only way to keep a wound from bleeding again, I told Amelia, when she asked why I avoided the media. She nodded in understanding. You're right. Justice can be public, but healing has to be private. At night, I developed a new ritual. I would place a single small candle on the table by my window. Its gentle glow would fall on the old photograph of David and me, taken when he was just a boy. I would light the candle and whisper into the quiet room, "Where are you, David? I'm not angry. I just hope you've learned something from all this pain." The small flame would flicker, illuminating that old picture, David's innocent smile, the one untouched by greed or betrayal. I would touch the cold glass of the frame, and a warmth would spread through my heart. I was beginning to realize that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing not to let the wound define the rest of your life. One crisp autumn morning, as I was watering the plants on my porch, Amelia arrived with a new envelope. Her face was beaming. Our foundation just received a major grant from the Texas Elder Justice Fund. They want to form a long-term partnership with us. I looked at the official letterhead, feeling both proud and deeply humbled. Who would have thought that a woman who once survived on canned food from the church was now helping others reclaim their dignity? I didn't cry. I simply smiled. A real, gentle smile, as soft as the morning mist. And so, my life found a new rhythm, a new purpose. But on quiet nights, I still sometimes heard the wind brushing against the front door, and for a fleeting moment, it would sound almost like my son's knock. I knew David wasn't ready yet. Maybe he was still trying to forgive himself. Maybe he was paying his penance through silence. I didn't blame him. I would wait. Not because I needed him, but because I needed the truth to come full circle. The truth about motherhood, about trust, and about a love that somehow survives even the deepest betrayal. I believed that one day, when my son finally knocked on my door, I would still be there to open it. Not because I had forgotten everything, but because I had finally learned how to love without letting myself be broken again.